To order Wednesday, July 18th, 2018. Let the record show we're missing one commissioner, I believe. Mr. Bollinger. Oh, and Mr. Jackson. Make that two commissioners. First order of business, any changes to the agenda, Mr. Hadley?
No, there is not, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, move on.
I make a motion to approve the agenda.
We have a motion to approve the agenda.
Second.
And a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Second order of business is approval of the meeting minutes from June 20th, 2018. Is there any changes or corrections to the meeting minutes? If not, I'd take a motion to approve.
Motion to approve.
We have a motion to approve the meeting minutes
Second.
and a second. Any further discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Okay, we'll move down to our agenda item 1. It's a rezone request to consider a change for the Brown subdivision from agricultural to limited industrial. The site is generally located within Lot 1, Block 1 of Brown subdivision in the northeast quarter, southwest quarter of Section 22, Township 140, north, and is approximately 1.5 acres. Mr. Hadley.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Also, item 2 is combined with that, and the motions are combined, so it's a plat as well.
Okay.
The intent for this is there's a home and an existing shop on site. The intent is to split the shop off for a family member to purchase. There hasn't been any comments except for the one that I gave you up front there. From the public, they don't believe the applicant is here. There hasn't been any other comments from staff. They do need required to get a approach permit from the county to figure out they've got kind of an approach issue there where they're sharing that they need to resolve. But other than that, there really isn't any major issues with this. It is kind of cleaning up. The future land use map shows this area to be industrial, so that's why the zone change to industrial is appropriate. And what would be remaining is the existing home on an agricultural piece as shown. And then the neighbor that had the email that was just inquiring how it was going to affect her, she owns property to the north. It really isn't going to affect her, and I think she understands that at this point. And obviously, her and I have had some dialogue the last couple days, and I don't believe she's in attendance. So with that, the staff would recommend approval. It is, up along Highway 22. It's on 43rd Street in the ETZ. It's about 1,700 feet from east of Highway 22, and it's in the existing Brown subdivision. So it's a replat of the Brown's existing subdivision. With that, pretty standard conditions of approval. There's some mailbox installation that needs to happen because it's two separate locations at this point. The recorder has to review and approve the plat. 911 address is posted on site, and there's a Southwest Water Authority separate meter requirement. Of course, the engineering would have to approve the plat as well.
Okay.
Prior to final recordation.
This is a rezone and appointment. There's a public hearing?
They're both public hearings,
Yeah.
yeah. So, it'd be two separate motion. The rezoning has to have a motion first,
Okay.
and then the plat could come after that.
Any questions by commissioners? Mr. Hadley, if not, we'd open it to the public for any public comments regarding this rezone request. Doesn't look like there's anybody here. Mr. Kubis, did you have some
Chairman
comments?
Frederick, I would just add that just for informational purposes that the city limits here, like Mr. Hadley said, this is in the ETZ. City limits are on the what will be the west and south border of this plat. So the right-of-way that's shown as 66-foot right-of-way, and then on the south side it's shown as 43rd Street East. Both of those are within city limits. So this will be immediately adjacent to the city limits, but in the ETZ. I don't believe the applicant had requested annexation, so just wanted to make
Okay.
the commission aware.
Thank you, Mr. Kubis. Anyone else have any comments or questions regarding the rezone request? If not, I'd take a motion.
I move the City of Dickinson Planning and Zoning Commission to recommend approval of REZ-005-18 rezone to limited industrial as depicted in attachment A and meeting all the requirements of the Dickinson Municipal Code and also being in the interest of the public health, safety, and welfare.
We have a motion by Ms.
A second.
Second by Mr. Decker. Brain is not working this morning. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Motion carries on the rezone request. This is item 2, the preliminary plat. And a similar thing is to consider a preliminary final subdivision plat for the Brown subdivision replat. The site is generally located within Lot 1, Block 1 of Brown subdivision in the northeast quarter of southwest quarter of Section 22, Township 140, approximately 1.5 acres. Mr. Hadley, just, is there
Mr.
anything more to
Chairman,
touch on there?
not necessarily anything new on that. I think that Mr. Kubis brought up a good point, and we discussed that a number of months ago, that these properties that are adjacent to our city limits that we may or may not have any intent to provide services for, that's something that we feel that, you should be aware of, and if we would ever want to do that, there should be a discussion or a direction to us to follow up and maybe encourage or require people to do annexations in areas that are appropriate. So I think that's where, Mr. Kubis and I have had many discussions on it, and I think that, it's our job to kind of maybe encourage you to where we can provide services for annexation. In some cases, and this would probably be one, that it isn't probably in our best interest at this point to pursue annexation.
That was my question.
So-
We don't have anything close, do we, as far as infrastructure?
Well, we don't. We've talked about an infrastructure project to the west in the Lane subdivision, as it's shown on the plat here, and that project didn't move forward. So we don't have. The parcel to the south is serviced off 40th Street, but it's a pretty deep parcel. So public utilities would be 40th Street would be the closest, which is about a quarter of a mile.
Any commissioners have any other questions? For staff? No. This is a preliminary final plat approval, so there will be a public hearing. If anybody in the public would like to make comments regarding this preliminary final plat, please step forward now. Looks like there's nobody here to make any comments. So then I would look for a motion or any additional questions for staff, if you have them.
I move the City of Dickinson Planning and Zoning Commission recommend approval of FLP-007-18, a final replat of Brown subdivision final plot as depicted in attachment A and meeting all the requirements of the Dickinson Municipal Code and also being in the interest of the public health, safety, and welfare.
I have a motion by Mrs. Dukart, a second.
Second.
Second by Mr. Kursky. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. All right, item 3 is a final plat. To consider a request for a final plat for the Lupo subdivision. This site is located at the southeast quarter of Section 30, or southeast quarter of Section 30, Township 140, Range 96 West, in Stark County, of approximately 7 acres. Mr. Hadley, any comments?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, this is a 2-lot subdivision that you heard a preliminary on a few months ago and a rezoning request as well. Those obviously went through. The applicant is ready to move forward and prepare the final plat. Their final plat, I think, is pretty clear. There's 5 conditions of approval. There hasn't been any comments from any of the property owners in the time frame that we've advertised for the final plat. There was some comments for the first go-around, and I think there was just more interest as far as what was going on in the neighborhood. With that, staff would recommend approval. This is located along 21st Street. It's in the ETZ as well. It's approximately 625 feet west of 30th Avenue. So the old truck route. And
It's almost
there's-
directly north of the water tower out there, right?
directly north of the water tower. It obviously is an ETZ, and once again, this is what brought up the discussion before. Our city limits is very close, and I think this was the actual opportunity, the actual example that Engineer Kubis brought up a couple months ago was whether or not we want to pursue annexation, and I think the consensus was no in these types of.
Right across the street is in the city, correct?
Would be the Pinecrest
Right.
subdivision
Yeah.
is on the southern side of 21st Street.
The applicant I see is here. Did you want to add anything? You're not requesting city services?
No, I believe that he's hooking up to Southwest Water and
Yes,
Greenfields, but
and
yes.
Walter is right. My name's Aaron Johansson, the applicant. This is family land, so I'm just looking at taking the pasture that's been there since they broke off this land from the father many years ago and developing a house onto their pasture, approximately a little over 3 acres. At this point, I have approved of Southwest Water. I've paid all the fees to them and have water reserved, paying the monthly fee. So I'm not requesting any annexation or services at this point, and wouldn't in the future.
Okay. Any other questions for Mr. Johansson from anybody? All right, thank you. Well, I guess if there's no other questions for staff, I would look for a motion. We don't need a public hearing on this.
You do.
We do. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me go back. We'll open the public hearing for the comments on the final plot request for Mr. Johansson. Anyone in the public would like to make any comments? Please come forward. Nobody. We'll close the public hearing since we don't see anybody coming forward and look for a motion.
I move the City of Dickinson Planning and Zoning Commission recommend approval of FLP 006-18. Lupo subdivision final plat is depicted in Attachment A and meeting all the requirements of the Dickinson Municipal Code and also being in the interest of public health, safety, and welfare.
All right. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. The final plat is approved. Okay. Mr. Hadley, did we have anything else? We have a
I-
little map here, so I'm assuming something.
I do have two things, Mr. Chairman. The map in front of you is just a map representation that the engineering department helped put together for medical marijuana dispensaries, where if it's in the yellow area within the city limits, they're shown depicted on the map. The way it's currently written, those areas would not be allowed to have a medical marijuana dispensary. And I just thought it was information that, Jan and I have been working with a couple different people that are interested in locating in Dickinson, and we're working with the state folks and going to visit with DSU and NDSU as far as the determining where their boundaries are for this particular use, and try to get them to be on board to identify their campus buildings as locations where we would want to measure the 1,000-foot distance from the first state code. Basically, we're in the middle of that, and obviously with the state delaying the approval process till January of next year, we're going to have to work through that, and we'll be bringing that ordinance back to you and the city commission to just discuss further. But this is just kind of a reference, just to kind of give you an idea. We had daycares on there at one time, and basically the entire map was yellow. So we've taken the daycares off, and now it's just licensed schools.
Actually, could I just follow up on that one? Sorry about that. The version that came out of, that was recommended by Planning and Zoning that came out and went to the commission had daycares and licensed preschools on it. It's when we went through the process of actually doing the map, when, as Mr. Hadley indicated, we realized it was everywhere if you included that. So at the first reading of the ordinance before the city commission, we discussed and recommended removing the daycares and actually licensed preschools. And I don't know is licensed preschool still in this map? I think they might be.
licensed preschools.
Preschools are
yes.
still in the, so
But
that, the map will be updated to, per the direction of the city commission, to remove licensed preschools. But actually, what was surprising, I think, to all of us was that the bigger issue was the DSU property and the NDSU property, thank you. They, because they did not, they have large parcels of land, but did not plat that land. And so the entire DSU-owned area, regardless of whether or not it has a building on it, is one piece of property. And that was our issue, because it essentially excluded Western Villard commercial area. That was our issue and our follow-up with the Department of Health. The 1,000-foot back from school is in state statute. However, how school is defined is not in state statute nor rule. It is actually being defined by policy of the Department of Health. So that has been a subsequent discussion, and that's why actually Mr. Hadley and I are having that follow-up conversation with Dr. Mitzel this afternoon.
Question for Mr. Hadley and Mrs. Murtha. And I know this is maybe jumping over this discussion, but if recreational gets passed, what is in, have any of you looked at the language in that? Or is that just open ball game? I mean, is...
Much like, Mr. President, in answer to your question on that one, I assume that it'll probably go through the same process that the medical marijuana did, which means regardless of how the referendum is written, it's going to look a little bit different when it gets into state statute. I don't know exactly how different. I will speculate, though, that 1,000-foot setback from schools is probably going to remain, because that is somehow worked in at the federal level.
Okay.
With the DEA looking to enforce that. But again, school is not defined, and that's our issue, is how to designate the scope of that. Is basically a property that has no buildings on it, but is nonetheless owned by a school, still a school property that we have to measure from, or can we exclude it?
Well, that basically answers my question, because, I mean, if this map, once we clean it up, it is basically static. We have in place, if recreational gets passed, we have in place basically where we can put.
Yes.
Yep, it would be a reference that
Right.
people could use. Yep, most certainly.
And having discussions with Mrs. Murtha, too, I'm glad you guys are having that discussion with Dr. Mitzel and defining what is actual campus. You know.
We're not sure the state folks are going to agree, but we'd like him.
We're going to try
him,
anyway.
Well, I mean,
We'd like him to agree that it's 1,000 feet from his educational building.
well,
Right.
same with the NDSU property. I mean, they don't hold classes on there, do they? I mean, there's no students there.
No, the extension center. No, it's occupied. It's owned. I would say there's just resistance at the state level, and it's a little bit troublesome. And hopefully, if recreational happens, hopefully they will clarify this actually in the statute. But they could have defined this in the statute. They could have defined it in the rules. They neglected to do both, and they're trying to pursue it via policy. And basically, the response was, if you define your school as anything other than what we think it is under our policy, then we're going to reject the application of whoever comes before us.
And we've seen the policy verbiage.
It's online in their Q&A. It could have been. I was disappointed to see in their Q&A a policy language that was different from the presentation actually they've been giving. They gave early on in this process and actually gave before the commission, where they said in that presentation, school's not defined, so you have the discretion to define it. They have since reconsidered that position and are now defining it for themselves.
But I think this map is a good start, and it gives us a general idea of what we can, I guess, anticipate, regardless of what happens in the future, be it we just have medical or we do have recreational. So.
I know there's a lot of comments out there with the frustration of the implementation of this. Right. That could force the issue in November on the recreational, because they've been dragging their feet.
Yeah.
So I guess we'll cross that bridge when we get there. So
Yep.
all right, Mr. Hadley, any other questions on the map or comments?
Nothing else on the map, Mr. Chairman. The only other thing I have is I have a number of projects out there that are striving to be finalized to go through our process. Unfortunately, none of them succeeded in providing a complete application at our last deadline. So what means our set policy is to not have meetings unless we have action items. We will have some discussion items in the next few months that Stephen is working on, but we don't have any action items for August. So you have August off. I know it
Some bigger projects?
breaks everybody's heart. But,
Is there some bigger projects coming down the line, or is it some?
replats. We're doing some replats and some. So they're significant projects. They'll be creating some better lots. The Diamond Acres area. There's 2 in that particular development that we're going to redo, and Mr. Kubis and I think, share our excitement to replat and kind of finalize and get that development moving with some roads and infrastructure in there rather than what we have right now. So that is a good project. There's some other things that are going on, but unfortunately, no one's complete. So,
All right, we'll move on to item 4 then. Items not on the agenda, I think we've covered most of that, so unless anybody has anything else. Item 5, public issues of city concern not on the agenda. Since there's nobody here, I don't know that we'll have that either. And then 6 would be adjournment. I'd look for a motion to adjourn unless anybody else has any comments or questions.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Motion and a second to adjourn. The meeting is adjourned. Well, that was easy.